I love talking about loneliness because it's something that we all experience. Some of us are a little bit more honest about it. Some of us aren't so ready to acknowledge our loneliness. And for me, loneliness has not always been something that I noticed in my life or acknowledged because I was usually around a lot of people and I had a really busy schedule and I I had addictions that have come and gone in my life, especially addictions to food. And after I had my car accident and out of body experience, came back into my body, I started to feel at some point, not right away, but at some point after, I started to feel deep loneliness. And this wasn't a new loneliness, if I was being honest with myself. This was a pronounced, exaggerated loneliness that I already had, but I hadn't really felt or tapped into so much. It was like the volume got turned up on something that was probably already there in like a low lying state. Because of the contrast, because of going out of the body and going into a higher dimension and being temporarily reunited with the highest version of all that is, with the presence, with the invisible parts of me, with all of this, without a filter, without any phoniness or fakeness, with full vulnerability and full acceptance, and being in a place where that was real. Coming back into the body, you can imagine, causes a lot of contrast to that, because the way that things are here on earth, the way that we're at right now in our human development, is that we're still very much in our ego, not in a bad or judgmental way, but we're very separate. We are constantly kind of like establishing our boundaries, who we are, um, trying to fit into this or that, trying to say the right thing. This is not how it is on the other side. So coming back here into the body, um, it was like, oh my goodness, I know what it is to be all right, to be fully vulnerable. I know what it is to feel fully accepted. I know what it is to be seen for who I really am, for my intentions. I know what it is to connect with my own innocence and to see other beings in their innocent nature. So now I'm here on earth. Very few people understand this. And I feel quite lonely, even when I'm around other people, even when I'm around people who I know care about me. Because even the best of the best people in my life, we still have these barriers in between each other. Our bodies are a barrier for our souls to connect, even. Our egos, any acts that we put on that are inauthentic, these are all barriers. And for the first time, I had contrast. I didn't really notice any of these things before because this is all we know. It's totally fine until you know the difference and it doesn't feel fine. I now, after some integration and processing this over several years, still ongoing understanding, it's an ongoing thing. I now understand my loneliness as a really big gift and a really big honor. Because without loneliness, we're not going to reach for reconnection with divinity. A lot of us, if we are feeling lonely or disconnected from other people, we get ourselves into codependent relationships that have a lot of attachments and control with the other person, maybe even toxic. We might get into addictions where we're numbing out any negative feelings of loneliness. We might be constantly social, constantly around other people, so that we always feel connected. But with that, we're always relying on something outside of us. We're relying on someone answering our phone or our text message. We're relying on that person we're in a relationship to show up in the way that makes us feel okay. We're relying on things that are out of our control. And anytime we rely on things that are out of our control, there's a little bit of an anxiety there. Like we're not sovereign in yeah, there's a little bit of an anxiety if that person or thing is unavailable. I believe that for some people, definitely myself, social media is a thing that people reach out to combat their loneliness. I think there's a lot of good things about social media, and I think there's a lot of addictive things about social media. Um, so, so after this contrast, after coming back into the body, and and realizing how lonely it actually can be, after the volume got turned up on my own loneliness, even when I was around other people, I I noticed that the things that used to work were no longer working. Going on social media was not giving me the same feelings of connectivity. Relying on my relationships to give me all of the happiness that I needed was no longer giving me the same hit, the same belonging and connection. These things were all good, but they were now kind of in their place. What I really longed for, I realized, was a connection inside, a connection with the other parts of myself, a connection with the inner guide. Because the more we're connected with the inner guide, with divinity, with the other parts of ourself, then our outer connections with other people, they can come and go in a non-attached way, and we can really enjoy and celebrate while they're there. And we can also be totally okay if they're not there until the next person or the next thing comes along. We can allow those other people to be free. We can allow those other people to be as they are, even if the way that they are isn't exactly how we want them to be. Because we're first and foremost connected with our inner guide, with our inner divinity. So yeah, someone can misunderstand us and leave us, and it's really sad to say goodbye. But we know that there's always going to be somebody else that comes along. A lot of religions teach about finding God outside of yourself, performing rituals, going to temples, festivals, churches, praying to this God or gods or deities. They're like somewhere out there. And for the most part, we aren't taught about going inside and realizing that God is actually inside. If we can find God inside, if we can connect to the inner guide, if we can reconnect the lost parts of us, whether it's the child parts of us from this life, who we were in past lives, if we can do these things, then loneliness doesn't need to, we don't need to find a remedy for loneliness in the outside world in the same way. We can balance our connections with other people in and see those people and celebrate them without needing them for something, without secretly needing them to give us something that we feel we're missing. When I was out of the body, in my out of body experience, I describe it as let me get the words right here. I describe it as a dimension where, without the limitation of the physical body and without the limitation of the ego and the personality, there's this reconnection with the highest version of all that is, a complete loss of anxiety and worry, and a knowing that we've all come and gone from that place many times before our earth incarnations. And since then, slowly, I've had some opportunities to reconnect with that place and that presence, although never quite in the same big, huge out of body way. It's always been kind of like in little snippets. And I believe that that came from this holy longing. I've wanted to go back there a couple times. Well, no, not a couple times, a lot of times. Because the contrast between that place and this place is really big. It has been hard sometimes to be here, knowing that that is there. And it's been a real practice to focus on the present moment and be curious about, you know, how I can be here on earth and have purpose when I know that that's there all the time. So that being said, there has been this real longing to go back, and again, it's never been like a suicidal thing, like I want to die and leave this earth. It's like that was home, that was connection with divinity, and how could I get myself into that kind of a state? And more recently, about 2 years ago, and I've mentioned this in other videos, I was in a traumatic, violent situation. After that violent situation, after I got to a safe place and I was just kind of like in shock, I really, really wanted to go back there to that out of body dimension. The longing increased hugely because now the contrast was even bigger. I was in a lot of pain and a lot of shock, and so far from from where I went in the out of body experience. But actually not far at all, because I started having some spontaneous out of body experiences after this traumatic event 2 years ago. And they kind of went like this. I'd be lying in bed, getting ready to go to sleep. And suddenly there was this kind of soft, glowing, little bit of a misty feeling where I couldn't feel my body so much anymore. And my heart started to fill with feelings of loving kindness for myself and for everything. And sometimes I could hear music. And on a few of those times when I came out of these spontaneous, I don't know what you'd call them, higher dimensions, I made a note of that music, and I ended up just recently making a piano album on Spotify with some of those songs. Anyway, back to this. I believe that going to this dimension for a short snippet of time was a result of longing. It was a result of longing. It was a result of maybe an intention that I didn't even know that I had, of being reconnected to that oneness, to that safe, beautiful, secure place that I knew and that I know is real. And if it hadn't have been for a traumatic event, and if it hadn't have been from like a new amped up version of human loneliness after my car accident, I wouldn't have had that longing. If you're someone who experiences profound loneliness, even if you're around other people, I consider it a gift and an honor, because it's a chance to long for something more. To not dismiss connections with other humans. I want to be really clear about that part, because there are some people that are just, they always want to be in meditation, and they always want to like get away from this world, and they don't see any value in this world and connections with other people. And I don't buy into that. But what I do buy into is there's a place and an appropriate percentage of our energy and in focus that should be in connections with other people, and another appropriate percentage of our energy and focus that should be finding that inner guide, that inner self. So without very difficult, painful feelings of loneliness and separation, we are never going to long for something higher. I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, but there's the idea of the anima and the animus. The anima and the animus, and you might have heard of this concept. It basically is saying that if you're a woman, you have a field around you, an invisible field that is your masculine counterpart. That when we're out of the body, we are whole. We are so connected with this counterpart. If you're a man, then you have a field around you that has a feminine counterpart. And it's not so much about gender, it's literally about like two polarities, two opposite ends of a spectrum. So when we're out of the body and we're fully connected, we are kind of in this enmeshment or this dance with our opposite. But when we're in the body, our opposite is in an invisible field around us. And we're always longing to some degree or another to be reconnected with that other part. And that's why we love to get into relationships. We love to get into romantic relationships because it gives us a, what's the word? A sliver, a remembrance of what it is to come close together with someone who is on the opposite end of the spectrum. If you're a man, a female man. If it's same sex, it again, it has nothing to do with gender. It has to do with like the polarity. Women are more, in a flow, intuition, softness, and then the male side is more in like action and will and materialization. And during the spiritual awakening experience, part of it, at some point of the journey, is becoming reconnected with that invisible counterpart. And it's not like there's a man that's in my energy field that I can't find. It's literally like the other half of me that I was separated from coming into the body. And that presence that I talk about in my out-of-body experience involved being completely one with the other. And in some of these meditations, or falling asleep and going back to that higher dimension, the presence of that other half, that counterpart, was kind of in me and through me. And there was the opposite of feeling alone. The opposite of feeling alone. And if you imagine, if you've been in a romantic relationship and you had a really good connection with another person, and when you're just there sitting in their arms and there's no problems and you're on the same page and you're so happy being with one another in that moment, I feel like that's one of the closest ways of describing being with that counterpart. And there's some kind of my words aren't really cutting it here, but there's some part of the presence of God, of divinity, of the all, that is very similar, connecting with that, as connecting with this counterpart. It's like being seen so fully, no matter which quirks or hang-ups, they just don't matter in that moment. And I know we've all had those moments in life. On the spiritual path, part of our experience at a certain point is reconnecting with that counterpart that's in the field around us, but not in a way where it's just one moment. In a way that's more ongoing, that presence, that higher part of us that remains in the higher dimensions while we're here embodied, that counterpart is always supporting us. That 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 counterpart is always there for us, but we can't always feel or hear or experience him or her. And again, not a person, not a gender. These words are so limited. But yeah, just our the other side of us. The other side of us. And a result, I think, of ongoing feelings of loneliness and ongoing calling out for help and calling out for reconnection with divinity is a closer experience of presence with that counterpart. I'm pretty open. I really believe that counterpart that I'm talking about is personified in as like a guardian angel. Could be the Christ figure, the Christ essence. Could be the higher self. For me, in visuals, I don't really trust visuals so much because it's more of an energy or a force. And humans talk about their visions and their dreams, and they use visuals just because it's like just a way of, some kind of a way of understanding and explaining through symbols. But I think it's more of a presence that people describe. I think that too, when people have out of body and near death experiences, and they have a vision of their higher self or of Christ or of a some sort of a figure that comes to them, it is their counterpart. It is their higher aspect. It is the part of divinity that is ahead of them as a human. So don't get caught up so much in this masculine feminine thing that I'm talking about. I'm just kind of like talking as I'm thinking here. So for me, I believe that loneliness and that coming to the end of ourselves and no longer finding satisfaction, or no longer finding the same levels of satisfaction in things of the physical world, allow our intention and our focus to draw in more of this, more of something that's eternal and lasting. And it's always there. I want to be clear about that presence is always there. And if you think back in your life in times where you really needed someone or something, and they were just there at the right place at the right time, that's the presence manifesting itself or sending you help. And we might not notice these kind of things until later. Your loneliness and your intention and your longing for something higher, something more familiar, something that has to do with home outside of the body, that's a real gift. It's a real honor. I believe the more that we long for things, especially things of a higher nature, they will find their way to come to us. That they're always there, but we have, in our human experience, we've come into a deep, kind of a dense realm where there's so much darkness and toxicity. And that darkness and toxicity clouds our vision, clouds our connection from the divine counterpart. Our addictions and our worries and our low vibrating negative thoughts. Our counterpart is still in a higher realm and in a higher vibration. And if someone is vibrating up here and someone is vibrating up here, we're not going to connect. We're not going to be a match for connection. It doesn't mean, though, that it's not there. It doesn't mean that. It just means that we have to be committed to setting aside the things that we're attached to down here in a lower vibration. And as we set those things aside, we clear the space for what belongs to us in a higher vibration. Our addictions, our compulsive behavior, our pretending to be something that we're not, our super duper busyness and distraction from being alone. We can go for years like that. And if we do, we're not going to make that connection in the same way. So know that if you are having deep loneliness, you're being real, because it means there's a part of you that remembers that there's more. There's a part of you that remembers a higher state of divinity, that remembers that there is a divine counterpart presence that's maybe trying to get to you just as much as you're trying to get to it. So keep going, and don't have any shame about loneliness. Don't have any shame about that. I think it's pretty special. I think loneliness just means that we're on to something, and we're just trying to find that counterpart that's always there and will wait for us as long as it takes.